That's the practice. That's the whole practice, is to come to an understanding of what it means to be you. Come to an understanding that what it means to be you, what it means to be you is to be present. Life is the way life is. Life is depending on the circumstances you find yourself in, life is a constantly changing dynamic reality of energy, right? Constantly changing dynamic reality of energy. And the human life involves a variety of experiences, right? It involves times when you're sad, times when you're grieving, times when you're anxious, times when you're happy, times when you're angry, times when you're frustrated, times when you're irritated, times when the physical body is uncomfortable, times when the situations that you find yourself in stimulate negative reactions. You know, those are all the ways that life occurs to a human being. So the practice is, instead of being a conditioned, limited personality in a body living life, and what that means is that your conditioning is conditioning to have preferences, to be conditioned to judge and evaluate everything, to be conditioned to try and change what's uncomfortable, to try and control life, right? That's the human experience, is adapting or trying to control life, right? But no matter what you do, no matter how powerful you become in terms of your ability to control circumstances and control situations, it will never work in terms of your being able to control life itself. It will never work in terms of your being able to control life itself. The only solution is to recognize that the conditioning that we've experienced sets us up for suffering. Because the conditioning that we've experienced is what we inherited from the prior generation, and they inherited from the prior generation, on and on and on. And human beings keep passing on the sickness. Human beings keep passing on the sickness of identifying yourself as a mental state, identifying yourself as a physical body, identifying yourself as separate from the world and separate from life. And this is the source of suffering. This is the source of the mistake that keeps being made. And the mistake that keeps being made is to consider ourselves, to think of ourselves and consider ourselves to be something that we're not. It's really that simple. And what we consider ourselves to be that we're not is a program. It is a mental process that has repetitive realities, cycles, repetitive processes of thinking, repetitive processes of behavior, repetitive processes of emotions, right, that become the life of the human being. And that life that is repetitive, right, that life that is based on the idea that you're separate from everyone else and separate from the world, is a life that's impossible to live and experience well-being, satisfaction, peace, and happiness. It's impossible to live and experience satisfaction, well-being, and happiness if you have it that you're something that you're not. And what you have it that you're not has you consider yourself to be separate from reality, separate from life, separate from other people. When in fact, what the teachings tell us is that's simply not true. That's an illusion. That's delusional. The truth is that there is no separation. The truth is, as the teachings tell us, that all of reality is an interdependent reality. All of reality is an interdependent reality, and we are part of that interdependent reality. Everything in the world, it depends on everything else in the world to coexist. And we're part of that. We're part of that. So we think of ourselves as a separate being, but if we look closely, because the way these teachings teach is to tell us, look closely, pay close attention, slow down, look very closely. And if you look closely, you'll see the evidence reveals that the truth is other than what people think it is. The truth reveals that. If you look closely, it becomes evident that your body is not separate from the universe. Your body is not separate from the universe. Your body is interacting with the universe all the time. It's integrated with the universe all the time. It's integrated by using the oxygen in the air. It's integrated by using the nutrients that are in the earth. It's integrated by being dependent on water, right, and food and air. That's a constant interaction between the physical body and the environment. Constant interaction between the physical body and the environment. So the evidence says very clearly you are not separate. The idea that you're separate is an appearance. It appears to be the case that you're separate, but in reality you're not separate. In reality, human beings think that awareness is something you're doing. This is an important thing to understand. Human beings think that awareness is something you're doing. I am being aware. Isn't it true that you consider yourself to be aware, right? Awareness is an activity that you're doing, right? That's part of the misunderstanding, right? No. Awareness is not something you're doing. You see, when you have it that it's something you're doing, then there's a you that's not really you, that you think you are, right? That's being aware. Isn't that the way it occurs? There's a you that you think you are that's being aware. I am aware. I have awareness, right? So I am, now watch, I have awareness. So I am here, and then I have awareness, okay? Right? Now, if you look closer, you can see that's impossible. How can I exist first without awareness and then be aware? Can you see that's not possible? It's not possible. And yet, that's the operational reality that we live with, that I exist before awareness, and then I'm being aware. If you look closer, you can see that's simply not the way it is. The way it is that awareness is first. Once awareness exists, then you can think you're a body. Then you can experience the awareness of what there is to be aware of. But without awareness, there's no show. Without awareness, there is no, without awareness, your existence doesn't exist. First, you have to exist, right? Once you exist, then you can play the game of life. Once you exist, then you can exist as a body. Once you exist, then you can exist as a personality, right? But the awareness is here first. And not only is it here first, but the awareness is you, is what you are. So this is the transition. This is the teaching and the practices. Coming out of what you're not, allowing yourself to recognize what you are, practicing being that instead of what you thought you were. And when you practice being that, you start to discover that you're not separate from the universe. You start to discover that if you let yourself be what you actually are, you flow with life instead of being against life, instead of rejecting life, instead of trying to control life. You flow with life. Well, why would you flow with life? How would you flow with life? Well, if you are awareness, and awareness is life, then you are life. Then you're flowing with life. There's nothing separate from life to have a problem. You know, when you look at this, if you really look at the evidence and you look at the truth, it's fairly easy to see it, right? It's fairly easy to see it, that if you are being what you are being life, and if you're being life, what's happening in life is you happening. When you're anxious, what's happening is you. You are anxiety. See, this is the thing to understand. The only reason anxiety is a problem is because you think you're separate from it and it's a burden to you. You think you're separate from it, and in your separation from it, anxiety is an experience you're having that's unwanted. right? That's the way it occurs for people, right? But if you stay in the work and the practices and you succeed in getting rid of the misunderstanding about what you are, right? Then there's no body to be anxious. If you pay attention when anxiety shows up, if you really pay attention, if you really look at what's actually real, what's actually happening, right? Right, what's actually happening is anxiety, whatever you mean by that, right? For most people, that means there's some uncomfortable, energetic experience going on in the physical body, right? That's anxiety, right? But if you really pay attention and you understand what these practices are teaching us, and you really pay attention, when anxiety occurs, if you really pay attention, right? What's there when anxiety is there? What's there when anxiety is there? If you really pay attention, what you will see is all there is, right, is the anxiety. If you actually pay attention, if you actually look, all there is the anxiety. You inject that I am anxious. You see it? You inject it, that I am anxious, and then you suffer. But the truth is, there is no you there when anxiety is occurring. If you look, there's no you. You think there's a you that's anxious. You think there's a you that's anxious. That's what you have to get over. That's what this is all about. Understanding that's just not real. That's just not true. And if you practice these teachings and practices, the time will come if you're sincere. It has to come if you're sincere, because the truth is always already here, right? So all you have to do is keep paying attention, and eventually you'll fall into reality, just because you have persisted and committed yourself to paying attention. This is what, by the way, this is what the koans do. The koans are not even so much a matter of solving the koan, right? Whether it's moo, or what's the sound of one hand clapping, or what is it, or who am I? They're all koans, right? Who am I as a koan, right? Because you can't answer that any easier than you can answer what is moo, can you? No, you can't, right? The key with koans is if you commit to practicing the koan, it means you're paying attention to it all the time. That's what it means. If you're really committed to solving a koan, the teacher will tell you, if the koan that you're attempting to solve is moo, right? Then pay attention to moo constantly, every moment of your life, day and night. You wake up to moo, you go to sleep to moo. As you're living your life, you stay aware of moo. You stay aware of moo. The idea that you're paying attention to it consistently is as powerful as the realization of what it is. The idea that you're paying attention to it consistently is as powerful as the idea of what it is. Why? Because if you pay attention to anything consistently, you're presencing your awareness. And the presencing of the awareness is the experience that will allow you eventually to recognize what moo is, what you are, what it is, the whole 9 yards. And that is called kensho. And kensho means that you are experiencing the truth. That's what kensho means. You can't continue to experience the truth because you have to come back into this game we're playing. You have to come back to the game we're playing, which means you have to come back to being in time, you have to come back to being a body, you have to come back to being a personality, you have to come back to doing the things that people do in this game, right? But you don't have to continue to be what people think they are in this game. You can get free. You can experience the freedom that's available by allowing yourself to participate in a committed process of paying attention. So, other teachers have said that all you have to do is develop your ability through meditation, because a meditation is practicing paying attention, develop your ability to stay present to what's happening. What's that mean? Pay attention to what's happening. But not just pay attention to what's happening, but be aware that you are the awareness that's attending. You are the awareness that's attending. And this is the experience of being reoriented to the reality of what you are. You are the awareness that's attending. And for you to be that and to know that is for you to be experiencing the truth and experiencing what it's like to be what you actually are. What is it like to be what you actually are? Peaceful, content, happy, satisfied, clarity. Yeah, when you experience the truth, there's no question. There's no questions. There's no questions. What is there? How could there be a question? Questions come from the person. Questions come from the person. Awareness doesn't have questions. There's nothing to question for awareness. Because awareness is simply being with whatever is. That's the beginning and the end. Being with whatever is. What is there to question? That's why the experience of Kensho, the experience of awakening, is an experience that when that experience is experienced, it's very common for people to say, this? Because what they're referring to is something that is already always here for all of us, right? It's the water the fish is in, so to speak, right? You know, a fish doesn't know it's in water because it's never not been in water, right? Yeah. So for us to experience consciousness and awareness as the reality that we are is like the fish experiencing the water, right? It's like that, right? And you didn't know yourself and you didn't experience yourself up until now because just like the fish in water, you've never not been you. The fish has never been out of the water. You've never not been you. So the consistency of being who you are is absolutely consistent. The consistency of being what you are is absolutely consistent. In other words, it's always the case. Now, that's one of the reasons why it is impossible to notice, right? Because if it's always the case, and what is always the case is consciousness and consciousness and awareness is no thing, it's not a thing, right? And it's always the case, it's always here, it's always available, it's always happening, it's transparent, has no form, has no shape, right? And not only is all that the case, but you are it. So given that you are it, you don't have to become it, you don't have to find it, you don't have to practice to be it, right? What we're practicing is not being it, we're practicing being aware of what we're being other than that. That's what we're practicing. Yeah, because if you practice being aware of what you're being other than that, like you're being this personality, and this personality shows up in thinking, right? Your personality shows up in thinking. In fact, the idea that you're a personality shows up in thinking, right? The idea that your physical body shows up in thinking. That's why when we practice meditation, what are we doing? We're practicing moving attention away from the thinking. And if we're able to succeed in moving attention away from the thinking and experiencing the truth of ourselves as awareness, right? And gradually that is a reorientation, and gradually that begins to be the reality of our experience, then the freedom that comes along with that becomes the freedom that we begin to experience. The relief that comes along with that begins to be the relief we experience. The happiness, the peace of mind is all part of the natural state, the experience. Now, with that being the ground of being, as you live your life, right? As you live life, right? Life itself permeates. Life itself changes all the time, right? Changes in many different ways all the time, right? The way that's experienced is it's experienced in terms of opposition, experience in terms of opposites, right? Life, the manifestation of life depends on opposites. The manifestation of life needs opposites in order to show up. In other words, day needs night, right? For there to be, time and day and night, right? Day needs night. Happiness needs the opposite of happiness, right? Everything needs its opposite to exist. So to be in life, we have to accept the fact that if we're going to be happy, we have to accept that sadness is going to be there. If we're going to be satisfied, we have to accept that dissatisfaction has to be there for satisfaction to be there. They depend on one another to exist. And because we understand this, we understand the perfection of the manifest world, which means that opposites have to exist for the world to be here, right? The possibility of the world not being here has to exist for the world to be here. The possibility of you not being here has to exist to be here. So your death has to exist for your life to be here. Yeah, and when you come into wisdom and you see how this all works, you understand that this is perfect. There's nothing wrong here. There is no problem here. And that's dramatically different from the ordinary way that we see things, right? The ordinary way that we see things is there's a lot wrong here. There's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with life. There's something wrong with the world, right? There's something wrong with everything here, right? Because the personality, right? The personality is experiencing its temporary existence as a physical body, and in that existence, along with the conditioning that got passed on to it from prior generations, it's living in a state of ignorance. It's living in a state of ignorance. In other words, we're ignoring what's real and replacing it with appearances and delusions and illusions and thinking and feeling and all the rest of what goes on in a human life. So to come out of that, right, means that you have to practice being awake. You have to practice paying attention and establishing yourself as the awareness itself. And in the beginning of attempting to do that, you can't maintain it almost at all. When you attempt to move your attention away from thought to the experience of the body breathing, to the awareness of the body breathing, you almost can't maintain it at all, because your habit is to live in thinking. The habit is to live in thinking. Not only is it the habit to live in thinking, but part of the conditioning is that you must think. You have to think. Thinking is necessary for you to survive. So you can't spend any time in awareness at all. As soon as you move your attention to awareness of the body breathing, it bounces right back to thinking again. Right? This is one of the reasons that people give up on meditation, right? Because they conclude, oh, this is about not my being able not to think, which is not true. You can't not think. So if you have a misunderstanding about the practice, of course you're going to be frustrated, right? But if you understand the practice, which is if you continue to persist in moving attention to the activity of awareness, being aware of the body, if you persist in doing that, if you sit through this activity of the back and forth, the back and forth, the back and forth, if you sit through it, if you persist, eventually the amount of time you spend experiencing yourself as the awareness aware of the body begins to gradually expand, and it gets opened up enough for you to identify and experience with the peace and the serenity and the sense of well-being that is available there. Once that begins to happen, meditation gets easier, doesn't it? Yeah, because now you have kind of a sense of how this works, right? And if you continue to practice and you persist, eventually, at some point, the process of moving attention to the awareness itself begins to be constant enough for there to be the experience of the transition from being the personality and the body to being the awareness. That's Kensho. Kensho is to actually experience the movement of the transition from your identification, leaving being a personality and establishing itself as the awareness itself. And that is an experience that occurs. And after that experience occurs, you will still be aware of there being a personality and a physical body, but your orientation is no longer to be that. Your orientation is now to be seated as the truth, to be seated as the awareness that you are, to take on the experience of being nothing, to experience being not a thing anymore, to experience being awareness itself, and then to keep practicing and learning about all of this so you can fulfill on the possibility of non-duality. You can fulfill on the possibility of actually experiencing that you're not separate from life, you're not separate from other people, and when that's the case, there's a sense of just flowing. There's a sense that you're just flowing. Now, having had the experience of reorientation to what you actually are doesn't mean that you will stay in that You can't stay in that. This is very important. A lot of people want to stay in the experience of Satori, stay in the experience of Nirvana, stay in the experience of Kensho. You can't stay in that experience because in order to be in the world, you have to go back, right, to identifying with the physical body and the personality so you can relate to the world, right, so you can operate in time. But when you go back, the orientation that you have is not that you are that anymore, no. That you now will always be from that point forward, after the transition, after the experience of Kensho, you will now know yourself as the awareness, even though you are expressing yourself in the world as a personality. And you're expressing yourself in the world as a physical body. But your ability to be with that as an awareness now, right, gives you a whole new realm of possibility, gives you a whole new possible experience of being a human being in the world. And that is an experience in which you can now feel at home and relaxed and at ease. So much so that you can let go of there needing to be any particular thing happening at any time. You can allow everything to be as it is, including the end of the physical body. That's what we're learning to recognize. When you bring in the personality, as soon as you bring the personality in, right, it's like, did you ever bring a magnet close to another magnetic field, right? As soon as you get close to being the personality, like you have a thought or two, that's the personality's thought, right? It's like bringing a magnet close to another magnet. It goes. It connects, and you won't even see it connect, and then you're being the person, and you didn't even see it. That's what happens. The practice of meditation is to experience an awareness of the phenomena, right? The awareness of phenomena does not include I am anxious. It doesn't include anybody being anxious. The experience of what's happening is just anxiety. And what I am saying to you is that if you look at it, when you're experiencing anxiety, if you look at the anxiety, if you actually look at the experience, right? Are you there? Is the you that's anxious there?
I would think not.
Yeah. Well, that's the evidence telling you what reality is like. If you look at the truth, if you look at what's actually so, all there is anxiety. That's it. What there is to get in to wake up to is nothing. What is nothing? It's an experience. What's an experience? I don't know. But that's real, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and is there a separate person experiencing that experience? If you look? No. That's called the truth. So if you live your life that way, right, there can't be suffering because who's going to suffer? But if there's nobody there to be upset about the pain, there's no suffering. There's just what's happening. There's no such thing.
There is anxiety.
There is no such thing as one experiencing anxiety. There's no such thing. Every time I ask you to look, you look and you tell me there's no such thing, and then you repeat that there's such a thing. Why? What are you doing? You see? But this is very good because you can see how easy it is to fall in the trap. Right, because the thinking that you have depended on includes the idea that you exist. Yeah, because why? Because if you're upset, right, and you can practice what we've been talking about, then the question you would ask yourself if you're practicing is, who's upset? If you look at the upset, what's the upset? The upset, well, okay, say I'm anxious, or say I'm angry. Angry is what's happening, right? Is anger a problem? You see, the only way you can ask such a question, is anger a problem, is to follow it up with the next question, a problem for who? If there is no such thing as anybody to be angry, is anger a problem? That's how simple this is, by the way. Anything that you're experiencing that you're suffering from, all you have to do is take a look at who's suffering. And if you're honest, the answer will be no one. And if you let yourself experience that, that's the end of the suffering. Simple as that. Anxiety is not a problem unless you think it is. And if you think it is because you think that you're the one that's anxious. But if you actually look, there is no evidence for there anybody being there that's anxious. So if you start to live consistent with that truth, you'll be free from suffering. It's really as simple as that, right? It only gets complicated when you start thinking about it and the personality gets involved and turns it into something else that it's not. Turns it into something that you're thinking about. Life is not something that can be thought about. Life is not something that can be thought about. Who you are is not something that can be thought about. The reality of it is that it is not something, it is non-conceptual. It's non-conceptual, yeah. The evidence is what I'm pointing to. Where is this you that's shaking? Where is this you that's suffering? Where? Where? If you can't find it, stop believing that it exists. It's as simple as that. You believe that it exists. You have to believe that it exists because it doesn't exist. And unless you believe that it exists, it's not there. But you speak it. You see, we have learned to speak the lie. You speak it and you act, and when you speak it, you don't even hear yourself saying it. You're asking me a question, but built into the question is the illusion. And so my response to your question is, take the illusion out of it and you don't have a problem. Take the idea that you're experiencing anything or that the body's experiencing anything out of it and you don't have a problem. What's actually true is what's actually here. And what's actually here is the experience itself. That's all. Isn't that so? If you can show me the you that is anxious, then we can continue the conversation. But if you can't, you've solved your own problem. There is no body that's anxious. And the reason that this is difficult to practice, right, is because the brain will keep generating that there is. It will, won't it? Yeah, it'll keep generating that there is. So you have to pay attention and watch it generating that something is happening that's not true, right? Until you're watching it long enough that it can't stand on its own anymore because you're seeing the reality of it. And when that happens, right, it stops occurring as if it stops being the case that you are suffering because you have succeeded in eliminating the idea that there's a you that's suffering. And there never was one. When you're present as what you are, you see things as they are. When you're present as awareness, you see things as they are. When you're present as awareness, you see there's no person. That's what you see. There's no person. Yeah, and if you see there's no person, then practice the truth, which is because if you see there's no person, then you have to practice that there's no person to live the life that is consistent with the truth. You have to practice that there's no person. Stop practicing being a person. And in order to do that, you have to pay attention. Because why? Because there's a program running all the time that says there's a person. And if you watch it constantly, right, you can watch it run, right, and keep producing the idea that there's a person, but you know that's not true. And if you see that over time consistently, it can't hold up very long because it's not substantiated anymore. You're not believing it anymore. And if you stop believing it, it'll die because it's not real. Don't think about it.